cure cancer, end global warming, make every American every person on the planet well-fed and have a perfectly wonderful sex life
before it kills us.
And then it will end the human race.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, February 11th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, the question of the hour in Washington seems to be whether we are on the cusp of a constitutional crisis. Federal judges have temporarily barred some of Trump's orders. They include orders to end birthright citizenship, orders to allow DOJ access to Treasury Department records, orders to transfer transgender female inmates to male prisons, and this order to place AID employees on leave. That's just a few of them. But the president and the vice president have questioned whether judges can do all this. So, Tom, what would it take, in your view, for this to become the crisis that a lot of people see just over the horizon?
Well, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so setting that aside, what I do follow is politics, and the politics of this seems to be that the Democrats and the media have gotten the memo. It's gone out. Carl and I used to, we talk about journalists, that old network of email list
It's the bat signal, yeah.
Yeah, that everybody was on the same page. Seems like constitutional crisis is the new phrase because everybody's suddenly using it, right? There's no concern about when Joe Biden ignored the Supreme Court order on student loans or any of the pardons or any of the stuff no constitutional crisis there. But suddenly we have a constitutional crisis when it comes to Donald Trump because he's doing all of these things. Now, some of them he may be pushing the boundaries of executive power, and the courts are rightfully restraining him. On the other hand, on some of these, I think there is a real question, and there should be a question as to whether the courts have the ability to tell the president, a separate, co-equal, but separate branch of the government, how he has to execute the laws passed by Congress when it comes to spending, for example. Can he pause programs? Can he stop programs? Does he have to spend the money? Does he have to spend it all right now? Like, those kinds of questions seem to be impinging, the judiciary impinging on the prerogative of the executive. And so I'm not sure in all of these cases that there is really or any of these cases, quite frankly, that there is a quote unquote constitutional crisis that everybody is up in arms about. But that certainly is the message that is coming across through the Democrats and most of the media.
Yeah, well, Carl, I guess that raises the question, what is a constitutional crisis, or what constitutes a constitutional crisis? Is it just when this stuff finally reaches the Supreme Court, or is it when the president decides not to abide by a judge's order and the judiciary has to do something?
Well, but what can the judiciary do?
Arrest him, send the marshals out, right?
The judiciary branch typically would file a motion a judge would find somebody in contempt. So they would find Donald Trump in contempt, and it would be up to the U.S. Marshals to serve that. Well, but the U.S. Marshals work for the Department of Justice. So the separation of powers issues come up rather instantly when you think about, how there's a great line Joe Stalin said when he was told he was running afoul of the Pope. He said, "How many divisions hath the Pope?" Well, this is that. How many divisions has the cops, the Supreme Court? Well, they don't have any enforcement capability. And so at least up until now, presidents have understood this and have abided by, even Richard Nixon, who the Supreme Court told Richard Nixon to turn over the tapes, Watergate tapes he'd taped in the Oval Office. He didn't like that decision, but he didn't say what J.D. Vance said yesterday. He didn't say, they're getting into the executive area. He turned over the tapes. It led to the end of his administration. Trump's a different kind of cat. Unlike Nixon, he doesn't have a law degree. And so he's saying, wait a minute, he's saying what Tom's saying. And by the way, Tom, the first person I heard use the phrase constitutional crisis yesterday was Scott Jennings on CNN. Amy Klobuchar was asked by Anderson Cooper if this was a constitutional crisis, and she said not yet. So I think Scott may
Well,
see.
I've seen supercuts of people saying on
Okay.
TV,
All right.
constitutional
And
crisis.
to
And
be
by the way,
fair,
JD Vance does have a law degree from Yale, no less.
Yes,
Right.
but what he said in Paris was incoherent. This idea that they're impinging on the legitimate executive power. Okay, right. But who decides whether it's legitimate? Until now, it's been the courts. I don't know who else could decide it. But to your point, Andy, and Tom's, and Scott Jennings, having this happened in Trump's first term, he had this ban. It wasn't a ban. It was a halt in immigration from 5 countries where Muslims are a majority of the population. The media pronounced this a Muslim ban. The Democrats and the pro-immigration groups went to court, and judges you never heard of in far-flung jurisdictions, overruled the president. That's not a good look for a democracy. And this happens in, foreign countries, like when some, governor, some magistrate in Chile wants to, charge George W. Bush with war crimes. And that's not how we operate. And so what J.D. Vance is getting to is what a lot of people wondered in the first term. How can unelected local judges overrule the president? Mm-hmm. Well, here's how it happens. Somebody, the ACLU, it's happened in New Mexico, files suit. Donald Trump doesn't have the constitutional authority to send these 3 Venezuelans to Guantanamo. The issue is joined. A local judge there says, appointed in most of these judges are appointed by Joe Biden or Barack Obama. And they say, no, of course he doesn't. Well, then that gets appealed. This time, despite what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have said, they're appealing these cases. And these cases are going to go to the Supreme Court. And I guess my view is the constitutional crisis becomes if Donald Trump or these sanctuary city governors and mayors and Democrats in Congress don't abide by what the court rules. Then you have what I would say is a constitutional crisis, because who decides who has the power?
Yeah. So all of the sanctuary city mayors and governors that have been ignoring and flouting federal law for the past however many years, I haven't seen a lot of coverage of that being a constitutional crisis. Isn't that the law of the land that they are?
I think we
ignoring?
We have consistently denounced that behavior on this very show, Tom.
But
so our conscience is clear. We stand for the Constitution here.
And again, I'm not saying 2 wrongs make a right, but again, Joe Biden, when the Supreme Court, I mean, the tweet's been out there, right? They said his plan was unconstitutional. He said, I won't stop. I'm going to keep going.
That's
now,
yes, right.
Right.
This
and
was
so
the
it's kind of like,
student loans, right? Student loans.
And did Chuck Schumer and the Democrats, did they say, oh my gosh, no, Joe Biden, you can't do that? No, of course not. In fact, there are clips in AOC on TV saying that the president should ignore the courts, should ignore these rulings. So I just don't think the Democrats have any sort of moral high ground to be. I'm not saying these aren't legitimate questions that need to be debated. I'm just saying the hysteria with which the Democrats and now members of the media are, their hair's on fire because it's a constitutional crisis. I mean, give me a break.
Right. Well, this is a larger trend, though, this trend of sort of power sort of aggregating in the executive branch. That's something that's been going on for a while. It's sort of nonpartisan. It's just been happening. And Tom, it seems to me that there's 2 things that could happen here, or should happen. One is it goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court makes a decision, and we abide by that decision. The other is that Congress does its job. Congress is supposed to write this legislation. A lot of this stuff could be dealt with at the congressional level, but they seem either unwilling or unable to do it.
Well, you're right. It has Congress has been sort of ceding a lot of their own power to the executive, in part because Congress is so dysfunctional these days and they can't get stuff done the way that they want to. And you're right. I mean, executive orders have become, Barack Obama had his pen in his phone. Joe Biden issued a bunch, but Donald Trump, issued and ordered even more. This is and I was talking to someone on our show about this last week. I can't remember. It might have been Sean Trendy. I'm not sure, but asking, is this, have we reached the limit here, or is there more that the envelope can be pushed even further in terms of executive power? And the answer was, there's still room to grow. And that is not a good thing for the Republic. It's not a good thing for the functioning of our democracy. I think Congress should take back some of its prerogatives and its power when it comes to this. But again, we are where we are, and so the idea that, well, Trump can't do anything until all of these cases, reach the Supreme Court is, I mean, that's no way to run a country either.
Right. But Carl, I guess, I mean, here's a theory, at least. This is the two cheers for the judiciary part of the show where, we do have these three branches of government. They're co-equal. The founders set this up basically, well, to check each other. That's basically it. And to slow things down. That it seems to me that was the two things that this system of government does. And is there any merit? Tom would like to have all this stuff done tomorrow, but is there merit in the fact that this, if nothing else, slows the government down? Because the government, in my view, should do as little as possible, and they should do it as slowly and deliberately as possible.
Your libertarian leanings are showing, Andy.
Yes, a little bit.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Listen, these things are all over the map. We talk about them like they're the same thing. The only thing they have in common is they're being challenged in court. When Donald Trump says changes with a stroke of the pen, he intends the very meaning of birthright citizenship. That's clearly got to be decided by the Supreme Court. That's in the Constitution. The court has ruled on it before. There's some wiggle room in there. That's going to go to the United States Supreme Court, and one assumes that the whole country is going to abide by that decision. Now, I say that, but the Democrats have spent the last 12 years demonizing the Supreme Court whenever they didn't get a case they didn't like. And I mentioned that, Trump, the Democrats are worried that Trump will do something that Nixon never did. They've been doing something Nixon never did since Barack Obama was in office. So that's to Tom's point. They're not consistent, and the hypocrisy there is a little hard to take. But that's one thing that's going to have to be decided by the Supreme Court. Then there's these spending decisions. Congress has appropriated the money. Trump says, I don't want to spend it yet. This is what J.D. Vance was talking about. That seems to be the strongest ground for the president. He's saying, I don't even need judicial review for that. Let's be real. We have a budget. We have a government. The executive branch is supposed to spend the money. Sure, Congress appropriates it, but they weren't paying any attention to where it's going. I'm paying attention, and this stuff has to stop. He's on the safest ground there. Then there's this whole other stuff he's doing. He's going to get rid of the penny. He's going to get rid of paper straws. He's making himself chairman of
Gulf of America,
chairman of the Kennedy Center, a place he's never once visited, that are just kind of bizarre and weird. And nobody ever thought a president shouldn't have that power because they never thought a president would think he did have that power. And this stuff's all in court too. So it's, I don't think it's any way to run a government. For the reason you cited, Andy, you want to slow things down, but you don't want gridlock. People are sick of gridlock, and that's one of the reasons they voted for Trump.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to take a break right now. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, a free man. Don't go away. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl Cannon and Tom Bevan. And yesterday, Monday, the Justice Department ordered federal prosecutors to drop corruption charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Carl, their argument seems to be that the case was interfering with the mayor's effort to crack down on illegal immigration. There isn't much of an effort to mask the sort of transactional nature of this. What does this tell us about Trump and his Justice Department?
Well, I don't want to make too sweeping a judgment. This is the first sort of major thing we see Pam Bondi do, but we don't know that this was Pam Bondi's decision. Let me put it that way. Eric Adams, when he was indicted, responded eerily like Donald Trump responded when he was indicted. And he cited Trump. And he seemed to be transactional, maybe. I think it has less to do with immigration and more to do with Adams made himself sound like a victim in a way that Donald Trump could relate to, because that's how Donald Trump saw this. I read that indictment against Eric Adams. There's things in there that you'd think any mayor would have to be called to account for in terms of financial irregularities. But Adams made it a more sweeping case. He made it a case about the Biden administration going after its enemies. And I don't think that's what happened, but I think President Trump was susceptible to that line of argument.
Tom, transactional or not?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems there is a transactional nature to this. I saw some of the commentary on this, and some of the folks said this was absolutely a bizarre ruling, and the reasoning behind it was really odd. On the other hand, I also saw Bill de Blasio, who was on TV early, saying he never thought this indictment was very strong anyway. He expected it to get thrown out, so he wasn't surprised by this decision at all. So it's hard to say. I agree with what Carl said, though. There certainly was an element of the way that Eric Adams portrayed himself. And then, after the indictment, there's no question Adams became uh, moved to the right on illegal immigration for one, but other issues as well. And I think really sort of, talked very flatteringly about Donald Trump and the administration, much to the chagrin of Democrats in New York and Manhattan. So he took some heat that way. But if it was, if he was making a bet that it would pay off, it paid off.
Yeah. Well, the criminal case against Adams, it just so people know, it involves these allegations that he accepted illegal campaign contributions, travel perks, flight upgrades, luxury hotel stays, a bunch of stuff, just good old fashioned sort of corruption, it seems to me. This was before he became mayor, of course. And the wrinkle to this is the Justice Department really didn't, as I pointed out at the beginning, they didn't really make an argument about the indictment itself. They just said that they liked what the mayor was interfering with his effort to crack down on illegal immigration. They also said they just would delay this until after the election, which doesn't leave Eric Adams entirely off the hook, it seems to me. It's a very interesting political move, Carl.
Yeah, I agree. And a friend of mine who's a lawyer in Washington said, they just shouldn't have put any of this in writing. They should have just quietly dropped the case. So yeah, so does that mean that Eric Adams has to continue to be nice to Trump for the next 2 years?
Presumably, yeah. I mean, I think that is
There's no one way to run a railroad.
Yeah, right.
Gentlemen.
And Tom, he made other news in your neck of the woods. Trump on Monday pardoned former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich, Democrat, former contestant on the Celebrity Apprentice, and among other things. He was, of course, convicted.
Guy with great hair.
Yeah, but he was convicted of trying to sell former President Barack Obama's U.S. Senate seat. But he's now pardoned. What do you make of it?
I mean, this is just the final episode. I mean, the real deal was when Trump commuted his sentence in his first term. And look, I was never a huge fan of Rod Blagojevich. That being said, he absolutely got railroaded. I mean, the guy did, basically it was sort of political horse trading that every politician in America does. And
but they don't always get taped doing it.
I mean, even if they get taped, whatever. I mean, the guy was sentenced to 14. They made an example of him. They actually, persecuted this guy. It was a prosecution and a persecution. 14 years in prison.
I think that's
that he got. He ended up serving 8.
It was an outrage, Tom. It
was a complete outrage. And again, I'm not a huge fan of the guy.
No, but you could have convicted this guy. I have a felony. He could have just give him, 6 months in the local work farm and made him resign. You would have sent the same message. It seemed punitive and that 14-year sentence well beyond. What's the Eighth Amendment? Cruel and unusual. It seemed to me.
I mean, he had like teenage daughters at the time. He missed all of their high school. I mean, it was ridiculous. So I was on record saying I thought Trump,
wait, he didn't have to go to PTA meetings. Wait a minute, I'm going to rethink what I said.
But I was on record at the time saying some people were upset that he let commuted his sentence, but I thought it was the right decision. I mean, 8 years time served is plenty, more than plenty for the crime that he, the quote unquote crime that he committed. And so, this is just kind of the final, I guess, cherry on top, but everything else, I guess Trump didn't have to do this, but he did. And Blagojevich was obviously happy with the decision. So,
how's it playing in Chicago, Tom?
I mean, he's old news here, really. He's become more of a national story. I don't think people are, they don't really have an opinion one way or another about Blagojevich now. Although, look, he's written a memoir, and he's been doing some media,
Well,
and
he's got a pardon.
he's got a
He
really
could
interesting story to tell when you listen to him talk about his time in prison and
he could
all of the
run.
stuff
He
that he
could
went
run
through.
for mayor now.
That would be
He's
great.
been pardoned.
He, he could.
You know,
He's
Tom, you
clean. He's got a
remind.
clean record. Maybe this is Trump playing 4D chess, and it's look out, Brandon Johnson, because here comes Blago. That would be
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Trump was asked about making him an ambassador, and he said he said no, but he's cleaner than a lot of people in this room, or something like that. But Tom, I wanted to ask you. You came up with this great phrase, "Pardon Palooza." Is this the end of Pardon Palooza? Are we going to just? Is this just the way things are done now, or have we sort of seen the spasm and maybe not so many pardons?
I don't know. I mean, usually the way this has gone is presidents sort of wait till the end of their term and distribute.
Not this guy.
Not this
Yeah.
guy. So we ended with Joe Biden pardoning his family and Anthony Fauci and all these folks
1,000 crack
preemptively pardoned.
dealers.
Yeah, no, drug dealers and murderers and God knows who else. And then we started with Trump pardoning all the J6ers, which was controversial to some people. And now we've got a pardon here, pardon there. But I suspect when Trump leaves office, he'll issue a whole set of pardons, and he might even pardon his family and issue preemptive pardons. Maybe that's the new normal. I don't know.
Yeah.
Andy, on a serious thing, I interviewed Don Rostenkowski, who was another Illinois politician, was convicted of graft. He was a very powerful congressman. You remember him, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and he got a long term. And I think he
Blago was elected to his seat, Carl.
Yeah, and he served a couple of years. But after, when he came out, he became an advocate for sentencing reform. And it wasn't self-serving because he didn't mention it till he was done. But he said, look, people get these long terms. And for most of these terms, unless you're talking about violent, unrepentant, violent people, 2 years in prison is a long time. And these congressmen, he said, I was one of them who think, 2 years is a slap on the wrist. It's not a slap on the wrist. And he talked about this in a very elegant way. And I think that's, if there's any good that can come some of this, it's time, we need to rethink this in these countries. These long terms people get for prison, where they're getting no rehabilitation services, it can be counterproductive. And so Blago makes an unusual ambassador for some of this, for reform in the criminal justice system, but I hope he speaks out about it.
Well, we'll find out. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the Middle East, and we'll also talk about J.D. Vance, his trip to Paris. Don't go away. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And gentlemen, President Trump met with King Abdullah of Jordan today to discuss plans for the population of Gaza. Trump hopes to relocate them. Gaza is home to 2 million Palestinians. He says he's going to turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. How do you think he did? And do you think he changed King Abdullah's heart or mind today?
I don't know if he was able to change any any hearts or minds. Certainly not King Abdullah. Look, this is the issue that has, I think, been part of the problem in the Middle East for decades. Was none of the surrounding countries have taken, many, if any, of the Palestinians as refugees, and so it's been part of the piece of the puzzle that's made it so intractable over the years. Does Trump's plan have a chance? I still don't know. When we first talked about it, when he announced it, I was skeptical. I think it seems fanciful that he's going to, a very sort of, George W. Bush, spreading democracy. Like, we're just going to turn, Afghanistan into a model, or Iraq into a model of democracy. Just like, we're going to turn the Gaza Strip into the Riviera of the Middle East. I still am skeptical that even if he was able to accomplish that's what it would become. But we're a long way from Trump even being able to accomplish that. And the first piece of it is getting agreement from a lot of these countries. And it looks like Abdullah was sort of non-committal when President Trump talked about this.
Yeah, Abdullah is an interesting guy. He's served for a long time. He's dealt with a lot of presidents. He's a very savvy international player. And if you watch the press briefing, you can sort of see that he's just a masterful diplomat, I thought. And Carl, he sort of put it off on the Egyptians, saying the Egyptians are going to come up with a plan. And when we see that plan, we'll talk about this. But, overall, yes, we understand what the Trump administration is trying to do here, and supported it sort of in the abstract, the very abstract.
Yeah, he just was making lip noises. But Andy, it's funny. Tom brings up nation building, and George W. Bush. He's going to turn these, these men of the 8th century into modern Democrats and Republicans, and moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans. We have enough trouble with that here. But Trump's position is a little simpler than that. He's not trying to change hearts and minds. He just wants the real estate because he thinks that's really pretty coastline. And so he imagines a Gaza without Gazans. It's kind of a thought experiment. Okay, could you then what? Well, and then where would they go? So Egypt, Jordan, on X, people talk about Qatar and UAE and these other islands you never heard of in the Indian Ocean. But these people don't seem to want to leave. And I'm not talking about Hamas now. That's as a death cult of sadistic killers. They have to be dealt with. But that's 1.9 million people in Gaza, and most of them are not members of Hamas. Most of them are not militants. They've been raised with this hatred for generations now. But most of them would like to either go to Israel or have a free, a freer society. They don't want to leave that land. They don't want to leave Palestine. So it's just, I've heard just the craziest talk. Oh, Greenland. Trump's talking about Greenland. They can go to Greenland. But it's hard to get,
that's soon to be red, white, and blue land. There's a bill in Congress that changing that name too, Carl. So you got to keep up.
So we come full circle. It made me realize that as hard as it is, George W. Bush's dream is a lot more realistic, as unrealistic as it is to instill in these people a love for pluralism and a love of democracy and a love of freedom, and to stop and have their leaders stop indulging them with hatred of Jews.
Well,
that seems to be the only long-term answer, but I don't have any idea how you get there from here.
Well, in that, you say 1.9 million people and most of them aren't part of Hamas. The part of the problem, Carl, is they've been, as you mentioned, they've been sort of marinating in hate, and they are sympathetic to Hamas.
Well, they voted in
Hamas.
That's right.
So that's part of the problem. It doesn't look like there's a demand or an uprising for a pluralistic democratic society in the Gaza Strip.
But what King Abdullah is worried about, and the leaders in Egypt have been worried about for 40 years, is if you let in a critical mass of Palestinians, they're going to destabilize your government, and they don't want that.
Yeah, it does put the ball in their court in an interesting way. At least I think for the American public, I think that they're Americans who, whether or not you think they should have a return, it does seem that a reasonable position is to take a look while we're fixing this disaster in Gaza. They've got to go someplace, and they should go to your country, Egypt. They should go to your country, Jordan, they don't even want that.
Trump's plan may be, unrealistic, but at least he has started some new conversations and changed the dynamic in a way that, hadn't happened in that region for a long time. We're now having discussions about things that, so you got to give him credit for that at least.
Tom, I agree with that. The Arab position is why do Israelis get to be in Israel? Well, and Trump's saying, well, why do Gazans get to be in Gaza? We're going to talk about that. Okay, let's talk about it. Who's made better use of their land?
Yeah. Right. Well, I want to switch topics a little bit, but stay on foreign policy. J.D. Vance was in Europe yesterday. He gave his first major policy address as vice president. He was talking about artificial intelligence. And he said in part, this was an interesting quote. He said, "At this moment, we face the extraordinary prospect of a new industrial revolution, one on par with the invention of the steam engine, but it will never come to pass if overregulation deters innovators from taking the risks necessary to advance the ball. Carl, this puts him at odds with the Europeans who want more regulation. At least some of them do. And then you have China, which is moving forward as rapidly as it can with AI. Where is J.D. Vance on this really? I mean, there are people within the administration, including including the president, I guess, who've worried about artificial intelligence. Here he's saying, though, we should sort of cut back on regulation.
Yeah, J.D. Vance wants Skynet. That's what he's saying. He wants to hasten the end of the human race.
That's
funny, Carl, because you always say that I'm like Eeyore, I'm the pessimist.
On this one thing.
on this one, man, issue, you are.
I'm Eeyore.
You are Debbie Downer times 1,000.
So the country that invented fast food, that's us. That McDonald's country. The French want to slow down. They take 2 hours to have lunch, so they want to slow down the destruction of the human race via robots. And J.D. Vance is saying, but the Chinese are moving fast. We have to match them. So those are the extremes of the argument. I think those are the parameters of the argument. I think I made it clear where I come down.
Well,
Vive la France.
Vive la France. Look, the core of the argument is, and J.D. Vance made this very clear as well. Do you think AI is a good or an evil? Is it a powerful tool on behalf of humanity? And does it hold real promise and opportunity? And he said clearly, the Trump administration believes that it does. And they are going to make sure that because of that, they're going to make sure that he listed 4 priorities. And one of them was that the U.S. is going to remain the gold standard, right? They're going to invest. We are going to invest and not allow, China to dominate this market, so that we, who I think we'd like to think of ourselves in that context as a good people who would be good shepherds of this technology, that we're the ones who are controlling it and have the dominant market share and are doing the deals with businesses and other countries to use this technology. And so, but he also said, look, he thinks he doesn't want regulation to be too burdensome and kill off this remarkable revolutionary tool. But it's clear, it's not just how fast are we going to go, how slow we're going to go. It's, the administration thinks that AI is a good for humanity. And Carl obviously thinks it is the worst evil to befall the human race ever.
Here's what will happen. It will,
Carl.
AI will be used to cure cancer, end global warming, make every American every person on the planet well-fed and have a perfectly wonderful sex life
before it kills us.
And then it will end the human race.
Right, so it's going to do a lot of good and then one really bad thing.
Right. Well, that hopeful note, we're going to leave this segment. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon, but don't go away. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Richard Porter. He is a former RNC committeeman from the state of Illinois and a contributor to Real Clear Politics. And Richard, you're a lawyer for 30, 40 years?
Yeah, 40 years now. Yeah, 40 years.
So you know something about the law. So let's talk about this constitutional, I'm going to use air quotes here, constitutional crisis that we have. Do we really have a constitutional crisis? Are we headed towards a constitutional crisis?
No, I mean, not unless you think that not spending money is a constitutional crisis. I mean, that's the crazy thing about it is there's one side that's arguing that the president has to spend money even if he believes it's inefficient. And if spending money inefficiently creates a constitutional crisis, then we probably have a crisis with our Constitution, right? I mean, it's sort of a nutty argument. This is a tug of war that Congress and the president have had for the 224 years that the Constitution has been in play, and frankly, it's not a surprise that it's coming up. This is coming from the same Democrats who impounded funds that were appropriated for building the wall. And back in 2020, they were appropriated. In 2021, Joe Biden just sort of decided it was inefficient to be spending that money. So you can take it all with a grain of salt.
So yeah, we talked about this earlier in the show, but Carl mentioned, look, there are a lot of different lawsuits that have been filed, and one of them about birthright citizenship, for example, that's in the Constitution. That's clearly an issue that's probably going to go to the Supreme Court, and I guess they've ruled on it before. Um, but
Yeah, but we can be aware of that. It was ruled on with regard to the child of a legal immigrant, not an illegal immigrant. And the wording in the 14th Amendment is what matters. So you don't
right,
have a binding Supreme Court precedent on this matter with regard to illegal immigrants. And it all spins around what the meaning of the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof means. And in the Supreme Court case that was decided back in the 1890s with regard to a legal immigrant, that really suggested that there were duties back and forth between the citizen or the legal person and the government. For example, was that person required to serve in the military and so forth? So, so I don't think that's really that much of an open and shut question. I mean, it's been treated as such, and mainstream media doesn't really, describe the nuances that are important to the distinctions being made. But that's a case that will probably go to the Supreme Court. I agree.
and clearly the Supreme Court's going to rule on that, and I assume that whatever they rule, the Trump administration is going to follow. I can't imagine them sort of just outright ignoring the Supreme Court decision, although that's what Biden did with the student loan thing. Basically, he tried to
Around it,
get around it, circumvent it, and maybe Trump would try something like that. But back to these cases where it involves basically Doge, right, and the firing of employees, and the shutting down of different departments, and the canceling of and termination of a lot of these funds.
yeah.
To your point, that seems to me to be, and Carl said he thought as well, this is the firmest ground for the administration to stand on. I mean, Congress appropriates these funds, but the judges, and certainly these judges that have ruled, can they really be telling the executive branch how to spend the money, or that they have to spend all of the money, or what they can do, or how they go about executing the appropriations that have been passed by Congress?
Well, I think it's important to step back and review our civics, which is we have three co-equal branches: Congress, which creates the laws, the executive, and there's a sole executive, which is the president. All executive power is vested in that single individual, who then delegates it down the chain of command. But all power rises from the president under the Constitution. And then the judiciary. And the judiciary, as a matter of custom, has become the branch that tells the other two what the law is. But other branches, the president, have to actually enforce what the law is. And so there's always a tension between the roles. The president has an independent power to determine if something is unconstitutional, for example. It's not solely vested in the courts. People can dispute that, and they'll go to the court, and the court will be seen as the final decider on that. But the president has an independent duty. If, for example, the Congress were to pass a law that violated the 14th Amendment, the president could say, look, that's a violation of the 13th Amendment, the limited, or 15th Amendment, limited, someone's right to vote on the basis of race. The president could strike that down and refuse to enforce that law. So you have these independent powers, three co-equal branches in tension with each other. And the thing to recognize about spending is it was long assumed that an appropriation was setting a ceiling on what the president could spend. It wasn't a floor. In other words, the president couldn't spend money unless the Congress appropriated it, okay? That's
Right.
the Anti-Deficiency Act, which is the president, and that's an act of, 130 years standing, which says it violates the law. Could be a criminal violation for the executive to spend money that was not appropriated by the Congress. But it was long thought, no one thought that it would set a floor on spending as well. That, in other words, if you appropriated $1 billion to the Department of Defense, that the president had to spend the full $1 billion. Like, for example, Jefferson refused to spend money on 3 gunboats that he thought were wasteful, that was appropriated by Congress. So it's long been accepted that appropriations are authorizations, not mandates. Sometimes they can be stated in the mandatory language, you shall spend. But even then, for example, under Roosevelt, spending was, Dawes, the first budget chief, his view was if it was wasteful, if you didn't need to spend the money, then it was the job of the president, whose duty it is to faithfully execute the laws, that incorporated within the sense of being faithful was being efficient. And so, and I think that just makes sense. Again, the whole purpose of the Constitution after the Articles of Confederation was to create a strong executive who could actually implement the law effectively. A collective body, Congress, which also held the executive power under the Articles of Confederation, didn't have the ability to make things happen. So we divided that power and created a strong executive, and it's inherent in the executive's role to make decisions about efficiency, about how money should be spent.
We're speaking with Richard Porter. He is a former lawyer of 4 decades and a contributor to Real Clear Politics. So, Richard, where does this go from here? I mean, clearly, the Democrats think and the media, as I've mentioned at the top of the show, are clearly on the same page, calling this a constitutional crisis, trying to sort of, build this up into something.
Thou shalt waste money. That's our way.
Well, politically, it might be a loser. Certainly defending wasteful spending, defending the bureaucracy is a loser. But if they're able to change the frame and the narrative well, that's not what this is about. This is about Trump is acting in an unconstitutional manner, and he's defying the courts. Suddenly, that might be more fertile political ground for them. Because I think, look, Trump's approval rating, we talked about this yesterday, is at an all-time high. His favorability ratings at an all-time high. People, independents and certainly Republicans, they like what he's doing. But he still has, I think, that residue and baggage of if people think he's acting beyond his powers, unconstitutionally, he could take a hit for that politically.
Yeah, it depends what he's doing. I mean, if he's doing the right thing, people are going to be with him on that. And I think that's the ultimate constraint. The political constraint is the ultimate constraint between the branches. There is the famous circumstance where the Supreme Court case made a decision about the rights of Indians that Andrew Jackson just said, hey, that's their opinion. I have a different opinion. They can enforce theirs if they want. And they had no ability to enforce it.
Right.
And his opinion was a popular opinion. And so he held that day. But that was always people kind of say, oh, my goodness, that violates the spirit of the Constitution. But, again, the court's role in terms of deciding sort of the constitutionality between the branches, it's a co-equal branch. It is not a superior branch. So they have to tread lightly on these things as well, because they don't want to make a decision that won't be enforced, right? So everybody's sort of looking at the political tea leaves on this. And frankly, I think one of the seminal articles on this was written by Mark Paoletta, who is has been nominated to be the new general counsel at OMB. I think that's the memo that J.D. Vance is drawing upon when he's talking about the limits of the courts to tell the executive what they can do. The executive is a separate and equal branch, and the courts do not have a super power to tell the executive how to implement the law. That's the executive's power, sole power under the Constitution. So this will play out in the courts. And I think the Trump administration is well within its rights to, you have a single judge appointed by a Democrat, where he's in Rhode Island or something like that somehow he's going to tell the duly elected president of the United States he must spend money wastefully at whatever agency they're talking about. I mean, it's not a position that's going to be sustained over the long period of time.
All right. Well, this is not the last time we will talk about this, I'm sure. And so we'll have you back when there's more to this story. Richard Porter, contributor to Real Clear Politics. Richard, always good to have you.
Great to be here, Tom. All
right. That's going to do it for us. On behalf of Carl and Andy, I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder of RCP. And you've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.